This is part 3 of how I made Lucy Gray's costume from the new Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes Hunger Games film. So I started off by dyeing all of the lace for underside of the petticoat, which you can hardly see in any of the reference images, but it was there, so I was like, I'm going to do it. I then cut out all of the pieces for the petticoat and checked that they were exactly the same size as the skirt on top, so that it would kind of flow and fit together. And before I sewed up any of the petticoat, I used that as a reference for cutting out the actual skirt fabric. So I just laid that on top of the fabric and cut round it, adding an extra inch onto the bottom. I then cut out a placket for the side seam and a waistband. To be fair, the skirt wasn't that difficult to sew together. It was just a basic skirt pattern with a placket and a side seam. I also added pockets to the seams as well, because I wanted a little bit more space, and in the book she mentions that she has pockets, so I thought that'd be a fun little detail to add, even though I can't see it in the movie version, but I'm assuming it's there somewhere. Here I'm just sewing the edges of the pockets and overlocking them into place, and then I'm going to sew them into the side seams before ironing them just flush down to the skirt, and they'll be pretty much near invisible, especially with all of the tulle that will later be on the skirt. Now this was the most difficult thing to do in this project, and it was all of the maths elements to figure out the different layers of the tulle, because on the original there's 9 layers and they're all individually dyed. So I tried to figure out how the chevron pattern worked, and then worked out how I could use the select amount of fabric that I had to make the pattern and to do the ruffles, which took a lot of work, but I got there eventually. So I did circles around in marker, and it was a heat marker, one that disappears. And then I pretty much just winged it, used my maths, and worked out how separate the dots were from each other. So this would be the highest and the lowest point of the chevrons, and then worked backwards from there, creating this zigzag pattern across the skirt in the marker. I then pinned it into place so that each point you could see from both sides of the fabric, and made a little dot on the right side of the fabric too, which was what I eventually worked off. This allowed me to then cut the tulle to the correct width and size so that it looks somewhat accurate to the original film. After this, I could then start the dyeing, which was so much fun. I ended up cutting the tulle to the exact length, which meant that I knew how much to dye for each layer, which was a lot better for me because I didn't have a huge amount of tulle left, so I had to be quite specific. I also ended up dyeing the shoulder straps as well, or the little ribbons that tie the top of the bodice together, at the same time, because it just made a little bit more sense, and they're originally white, and on the film version they're purple/lilac. And here's all of the layers of the tulle fully dyed. I'm so happy with the colour that I managed to get. I just used acrylic paint, which I know is not what you're meant to do, but it dyed it so well, it meant that I could get the exact colours on a smaller budget instead of buying actual dye to do it, especially because it's polyester. So it worked really, really well, and I mixed it with a fabric dye medium so that it'll stay and it's waterproof. And now we're on to the final bit of hand gathering all of the layers of tulle. So I used a large running stitch on the machine and just went through each layer, and then gathered it by holding one of the top threads and pulling it until it got to the right size. And I pinned my tape measure to the floor so that I could lay the tulle against it so that I knew it was going to be the right length before I tied off the string and pinned it onto the fabric. So layer by layer, I pinned and sewed on each strip of fabric to make the chevrons, and checked that each piece looked right, so I tried it on every time just to check that all of the chevrons lined up and all of the zigzags kind of made sense to each other, as well as that I'd got the fabric dyes in the right place. And I think it turned out really well. This is the final piece, so yeah, woo! And that's it. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe below.